aplastic anemia, where you destroy the bone marrow. And then we talked about anemias where you're not getting a proper element to make correct hemoglobin, like the vitamin Bs or iron. And then we talked about ones that are genetic. And that's where we ended up, was with those genetic anemias. Another type of anemia is extrinsic anemia. So this is like, think of this as like outside of the body. And this is really going to be due to blood loss, can be an example of extrinsic anemia. So severe blood loss, you're going to have less red blood cells, all right? And depending on the severity of that blood loss, you're going to have different symptoms, okay? Once you get to a point of like 50% blood loss, you're going into shock now, all right? Which is a good thing. In regards to just blood loss, if you have like mild, this is, you want to faint. You're prone to fainting. That's the type of manifestation that you're going to see with just a mild amount of blood loss. Intermediate is going to involve, actually intermediate and a greater loss, like severe. These two together, you're really starting to decrease your blood pressure here, because you're losing blood volume as you're bleeding out, all right? Another extrinsic type of anemia, so this is dealing with, blood loss. Extrinsic. It's not really anything that's going on in your body that's causing this anemia. It's something outside, like you cut yourself. The other type is dealing with mom and fetus. And so the fetus can get into having anemia if the blood types of mom and fetus are not compatible. And this is really only going to become a problem if mom actually comes in contact with baby's blood that's not compatible to hers. She's going to then start to make antibodies that will cross the placenta and start to attack baby's blood. All right? So those are the extrinsic ones. The last thing is polycythemia. Oh God, I'm having a hard time spelling things today. Need more sleep.
Don't we all?
Need more sleep. Before I get into this, I want to make one more thing on anemia, which also follows with polycythemia. These things you can say is absolute or relative. Now, if we're thinking about whole blood, what are the two main components of whole blood here?
Plasma, erythrocytes.
Plasma and erythrocytes. So the plasma and the erythrocytes. If we're talking about absolute anemia, is that a consequence of low erythrocyte numbers or a consequence of something going on in the plasma? Would you just think intuitively?
High erythrocytes.
Erythrocytes. So absolute is, hey, you do have a decrease in red blood cells. All right? Relative, that type of anemia, you have a normal red blood cell count, right? But in relation to the percentage of plasma in your whole blood, you actually have more plasma than normal. And so to sort of like a dilution of red blood cells. Okay? They would find this out by doing like a blood count here, instead of doing a hematocrit. All right? Everybody good with that? So polycythemia is the opposite, where you have more than normal red blood cells. And you can have this thing called polycythemia vera, and this is an actual neoplasia. And in polycythemia vera, these individuals are not only making more red blood cells, they're making more platelets, they're making more leukocytes, they're just making more formed elements in general in polycythemia vera, okay? The other types of polycythemia is going to be primary or secondary, and this thing called relative anemia. This one is, let me get my brain. I think this one they're calling primary because the next one is secondary, but I don't really, I just tend to call this polycythemia vera, which is neoplasia, making more and more and more and more of these formed elements, all right? Secondary polycythemia, it means that there's nothing, wrong with your body, okay? You're just adapting to, you're adapting to a different environment. The thing that could be wrong with your body is that you are not able to breathe in oxygen well, or you have some type of lung disease that causes you to increase your red blood cell count. So that's why it's secondary. So lung diseases or high altitude will do this. And your body then is going to shift to making more red blood cells to accommodate this change, okay? I'm going to have problems spelling words today because I'm sleeping, sorry. Making more, increasing. And then the relative, so in anemia, hey, you have normal red blood cell count, but you have more plasma here, so you're anemic, but it's not because of the number of red blood cells. So you can have that with polycythemia as well, that's relative, all right? What situation is going on here where you have a higher percentage of red blood cells, but the number of the red blood cells is actually normal? So this is the same thing. The number of red blood cells are normal, but if you do a hematocrit, it shows you actually have a higher percentage of red blood cells compared to plasma. What would cause this? What would be a relative thing here? So if we did a blood smear and you counted the number of red blood cells, it'd be a normal count. You see where I'm going with this?
Blood doping?
Yeah, blood doping could do that, for sure. I'm looking more at a clinical thing that could cause this, rather than someone that's trying to increase their performance. So in this situation, you have a normal red blood cell count, but instead of having more plasma, do you have less plasma than you should normally? Does that make sense? For polycythemia? So in this situation, you have less plasma. What does that mean clinically then?
Your blood's going to be more viscous.
It's going to be more viscous, but what potentially might be going on in that individual to make it to where they have less plasma?
Maybe they haven't been drinking enough water.
They're dehydrated. That's exactly what happens a lot in relative polycythemia. It's what happens when you're dehydrated, okay? So dehydration. And that ends red blood cell disorders. You're done. Any questions? All right, so I have made for you this table. This is just the anemias, like what I had already talked about. So I don't have the extrinsic anemia or this polycythemia on this table. These are those other ones that we did on Tuesday. And you're gonna use this table with the case studies that I'm gonna put you in groups to work in.